the History Things podcast, a conversational approach to discussing social, industrial, maritime, music, and military history. Join us and our special guests as we dive down the rabbit holes of your favorite stories from the past. Follow the History Things podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or online at Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be sure to leave a review and a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app. Pat and Parker are coming right up. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy the show.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the History Things podcast. I'm your host, Pat McGuire, broadcasting from an unusual place for us. We're not in studio. We're not in outer space like we said we would be when next time we did this. We are actually at a very cool top secret site we'll get to in a minute. But first, joining me, as always, is the ambassador from Maine. The state of Maine, I guess, sovereign nation, has its own ambassador, Parker Russell. He joins us. How are you, Your Excellency?
Thank you. I appreciate the proper terminology, the proper greeting there.
They threatened war against the state of Maryland. We can't have that at this time.
Yeah.
So listen, we're here today hanging out with some old friends, some former guests of the show here. We're catching up with them. A lot has happened in life and in professions, and we thought it'd be good to sit down and have a chat. And of course, getting right to it, returning to the show are our friends Melissa Winn and Dana Shoaf. Welcome back. First of all, how are you? How's everyone?
Great to see you guys here. Thanks for having us on. Yeah.
Last time we caught up with you guys was in separate recordings. You guys were talking about murders along the Potomac, interesting generals. Yeah. We had this talk about probably the coolest general, right?
Absolutely.
Coolest
John
general.
Rollins.
Who was that?
Rollins.
Never heard of him.
Yeah.
That's right. So, and that was back when you guys were still working at Civil War Times and HistoryNet, and a lot of that has changed. So now we are here at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine here in downtown Frederick. Let's catch up. Like, what's been going on with you guys in the personal world, in the professional world? Just how you been? It's been almost 3 years. I looked at the calendar. Almost 3 years.
Has it been that long?
Wow.
Your
really?
dates on the wall are July of 22 and October of 22.
Holy cow.
Wow,
It's been flying.
really?
Yeah.
Oh
It
my
really
gosh.
seems like, because I remember the no Rollins, no Grant.
No Rollins, no Grant.
I remember
Yeah.
that. Like I remember doing QC on that episode, and I was like,
I can't
that seems like
believe
yesterday.
it was that long ago.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Me too. I literally was like, man, it's probably been only like a year. I was like, no, it's
No,
been almost
wow.
3.
Wow, yeah.
Wow.
It goes
So long
fast.
overdue.
Yeah.
So long
well,
overdue.
Yeah, good to see you both. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks for hosting us.
So
too,
again,
too.
so
Yes.
what's been going on in your world since the old HistoryNet and Civil War Times went under, and you guys have moved on to a new and very awesome line of work here? Tell us about it.
Well, I came to the museum in November of 2023, and that's been a year and about 4 months, I guess. And previous to that, like you said, I'd been the editor of Civil War Times for a decade. Was it longer than that, Melissa?
I thought
Little-
it was longer than that.
Something like that. But I'd been there a long time.
Well,
and
before that, America's Civil War.
American
so.
Civil War magazine. I really liked that job very much. But David Price, the executive director here, just reached out. I got a text from him one day, and he said, "Have you ever thought about doing anything else?" or something to that effect. And I said, "Well, what are you getting at?" And he said, "Well, I need a director of interpretation here." And so I said, well, let's have lunch. So I came here to Frederick. We had lunch. He talked about the fact that, and I'm sure we'll get into this, the museum was going to begin an extensive redesign for the first time in 25 years, and wanted to change up a lot of things and bring some new energy and whatnot to the museum. So I took a chance and left the magazine and came over, like I said, November of 23. And Melissa had already gone from the magazine before that.
I was going to say, because
Right.
I feel like in episode 1 we did with Melissa, you were still with the magazine. And then in
Right.
episode 2, you had just taken your job at the Battlefield Trust. So
Correct.
it's like,
Yes.
you've actually been moving a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it should be stated that
Sure.
the magazine ending was writing on the wall. That
Right.
was kind of obvious. So
I guess it's fine to say it. What we were, for those listening, the magazine that we worked for, Civil War Times, and worked on others as well, was a really good little historical magazine group of 9 magazines. And it was purchased or taken over, however you want to
Yeah,
put
it was
it.
purchased in 2015 by a private equity firm.
Private equity
so
firm who just sort of
They had different goals for
Different
the
different dreams.
magazine.
I was going to say, if you pass up the opportunity, don't do it, Dana. Different dreams. Don't pass it up.
Different dreams.
Oh, Fremantle.
Oh yeah, Fremantle, and so unfortunately that magazine group is no more, and
Yeah, that is a shame.
it's
It
a
really
real
is.
it's a real shame.
It really is.
Yeah.
They were stellar magazines.
Well, you guys were very kind to us with your time while you were there running ads and stuff for us. So thank you again
Absolutely.
for that.
You know, we both absolutely loved helping the community any way we
Yes.
could, and ads or getting people on videos or our Facebook page, drawing people's attention to interesting historical sites, podcasts, programs, whatever. I detest when I hear the term young people are not interested in history.
Oh, yeah.
Young people are very interested in history.
Yeah.
They're just pursuing it in different ways. And so we always try to pay attention to that. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate that. And I was very personally happy when I realized you guys were landing right in my backyard because, obviously this is a continuation of that doing work for the community. Obviously this is a museum space, but you guys are doing so much more than that. You're out in the world. You're
Right.
being a presence.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. You're helping voices get elevated and stuff like
Well,
that.
to help segue into Melissa here,
Yeah.
I feel like a year and 4 months is not very long to be at a place like this because I went from a very, very fast-paced industry, publishing,
Sure.
to museum work, which has its own rhythm, right?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
And so that took me a while to get used to, and I wanted to do things and go out and engage in the community more, and I kept thinking, I'm missing a flipper here. I can only swim so hard. And so to segue to Melissa,
Yeah.
You got the band back together.
Yeah, exactly. We did get the band back together. Yeah, I joined the museum in September of last year, and I absolutely love it. We're having a great time. Dana and I work very well together. We are of like mind and creative pursuits.
So what do you do here at the museum? You basically put the actual creative stuff in motion and Dana stands in front of the camera? Like how does it work?
So here I do a lot of different things. I'm the director of marketing and communications.
Okay.
So all the social media, the platforms that we are on, the campaigns that we do on social media are all directed by myself. And also we have a membership magazine. That was one of the things that we sort of started to redesign right away, actually.
pick up a copy of it.
Yeah, once I got on board. Ooh. And
all right.
so,
Oh, that's great.
we completely revamped the membership magazine here. And really, we made it 4-color. I was so excited when the executive director, David Price, said we were going to print in 4-color. It's it just makes it pop and really feel
And that's a
Great.
small tool, big decision that's going to help grab newer
Absolutely.
audiences.
Yeah.
Just because
Yes.
the black and white almost creates a disconnect now to newer audiences. They perceive it to be so old that it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
and
Yes.
it's not.
I
It's-
absolutely agree. It kind of detracts from the content. And, to be fair, there is a void now without
Right.
some of these magazines. Civil War Times, America's Civil War, American History. There's a void in some of the, history content that's out there in magazine form. We're devoted to keeping this as a print product.
I love it.
And
That's amazing.
we know that our audience wants a print product. So
I do like books I can hold,
Yeah.
magazines
Yeah.
I can hold.
Yeah.
My wife is the consummate digital reader.
right?
It kind of stresses me out how easily she
And-
has
and peop-
adapted to that.
Yeah.
People can get this digitally as well.
yeah,
But-
we offer it
yeah.
digital as well. But
Where
it's
can
a
they?
real
Which
benefit.
platforms can they find it on? Is it like exclusive to anything, or pretty much?
So
anywhere?
it's a member magazine,
member,
so
yeah.
you have to be a member in
Okay.
order to get it digitally and
Great.
sent to you as well.
So I kind of feel like member magazines or association publications are sort of one of the last bastions of print. And like American Battlefield Trust has Hallowed Ground.
Right.
And that
Yep.
sort of scratches an itch, I think, for people with the demise of Civil War Times. Of course, there is Civil War Monitor out there as well. But then this is another way of getting a print publication. Right now, twice a year it's published.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are the big stories in it right now? So this will be coming out in the spring, early summer of 2025.
Yeah.
So what are some big stories that are going to be in it?
So one of the really cool aspects of sort of turning this more into a magazine, more like a commercial magazine than just a member newsletter in a larger format, was really turning it into the structure of a magazine. So taking it from just a compilation of a bunch of content to having departments like a magazine, having features like a magazine. So we really did follow that sort of magazine structure, recipe, whatever you want to call it. So this is our first issue, which came out in December, where I literally just an hour ago sent to the printer our next issue.
Oh, wow.
One of the things that's great is that we have a lot of contacts from our magazines, before. So this issue has a feature. Let me grab this back here because I've been working on the new one. So
your brain's got that new stuff in it.
Yeah.
Right.
I hear that.
Yeah. So this one, we worked with Scott Mingus and Jeffrey Anderson on this first-person account of a surgeon. Again, we really are focusing on medicine, but we're really trying to show, too, that the medical aspect of the Civil War touches everything in the Civil War.
Right.
So our next issue that's coming out is going to feature a story by John Eric Yeo. Actually was really neat. I saw him, just on a Facebook message talking about a journal article that he was working on about the first amputee of the war. Of course, we talk all the time about how it's Confederate James Hanger, who went out and then created his own prosthetic leg.
Right.
The Hanger Company is still a huge orthopedic industry. It's a very large industry company still.
That guy made himself filthy rich off that
That's
prosthetic.
right.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
He really designed a better prosthetic, and he went with it.
He's lucky he got hit in the leg.
Yeah, right. Exactly. He is so rich.
He is so rich
So
now.
rich.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, man.
But this article that John Eric Yeo contributed challenges the concept that he's the first amputee of the war.
Oh.
He actually discusses a citizen who was working on the railroad and was injured before the Battle of Philippi. I'm going to say that incorrect.
Benjamin Kelly.
I say Philippi. Just
I
for
think
the
it's
record.
Philippi.
Sort
as I
of
say.
Benjamin Kelly's, I believe that was the officer, a fairly semi-obscure Union commander,
Yeah.
was assembling a troop train.
All right.
And this guy was a civilian railroad worker, and due to circumstances, he fell off the car he was on and had to have an amputation.
And the other person that he was with was killed. And he spends, this is what one of the parts I thought was fascinating about the story, and why, I thought it was important for us to tell the story too, was that he spends the rest of his life trying to get a pension, reimbursed like soldiers were reimbursed, because he was in the construct basically of the military.
Sure.
He
was doing work for the military.
Right, he was working for the military, but of course the pension system is overloaded when soldiers start actually getting pensions, and so there are some people within the government who try to deny that he is owed a pension.
All right. So get a member subscription.
Absolutely.
Find out how the story
It's a fascinating
goes.
story.
Tell us off the record, off mic, how it turns out. 'Cause
Yeah.
I want to know today now.
Okay.
We'll leave the magazine. I just wanted to show, there's interesting stuff in this magazine.
Yeah.
A friend of ours named Phil Spoggy actually helped track down this regimental history that was owned by that gentleman, Iowa cavalryman named Jehoiada Worth. And inside the regimental history, he found this very early X-ray,
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, that's
which still shows a projectile embedded in his skull from a skirmish in Arkansas.
When about was that X-ray made? Do you know?
That one was right after the turn of the century.
Yeah, like 1909.
Yeah.
Oh, that is like super early.
Yeah, and it actually was still in an envelope from the doctor who did the X-ray, who we found out was an very early X-ray specialist in San Diego area.
wow.
Where this guy ended up after the war out in California.
Very cool.
This is such a beautiful publication. Like you mentioned, full color.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's not watching on YouTube, and why wouldn't you? But for
Why
anyone who's
wouldn't
just
you?
why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you?
But for anyone who's just doing the listening part, thank you and welcome. We think about, maybe I'm wrong in this assumption, but we think about a lot of times as just black and white.
Yeah.
These are
Right.
black and white pictures. It's not.
No,
Sepia is different. You know what I mean? And then with these colorations, they're absolutely just
Thanks.
brilliant and amazing.
Well, we were-
it looks beautiful.
CivilWarMed.org.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Go there, sign up, become a member right now.
Yeah, that's our website.
Do
Is it hard to
You're
become
not
a
going to
member?
regret it. This is beautiful.
Is it hard to
Oh,
become
no,
a member?
it's
Yeah,
very
because here's
easy.
why I'm asking, and this is
Oh,
this
no,
probably
no,
leads
no.
into all the
Right,
revamping you guys have been
right,
doing.
right,
Is a
right.
lot of history interfacing online is very archaic. You want to help
Oh,
here, and
no.
it becomes hard. Is
Well,
it easy
we-
to become a member here?
Our
Absolutely.
current website is very accessible, but we are also redesigning it. So that's going
Yeah.
on. There's too many. It went from not a lot to a lots of stuff. And
All right.
as far as you were saying, what do I stand in front of the camera and Melissa's behind it? I have had a hard time finding time to get out to do a lot of those videos because of this massive exhibit redesign. But Melissa does, I think she's advocated for herself here a lot more than hold a camera. I mean, she's
The reason I asked is just because I know that she has fantastic skills behind the camera as a photographer.
Oh,
so I
yeah.
don't know
Oh, yeah.
if that was something you
Well,
I appreciate that.
absolutely
Her photography has radically changed our social media platforms very quickly. So
fantastic.
beautiful.
So
It's beautiful.
when you
It looks
guys separately at different times were coming on board here, knowing that this was going to be primarily a medicine conversation, were you guys? I don't want to say nervous because I feel like you guys have been in the game for a long time, but was it like exciting, challenging, or was it like, ooh, how am I going to like find a way to kind of make everything I'm interested in or working on kind of go through this medical
when I came here,
yeah, like right when you came on, were you
that's a really good question because honestly, as long as I've been interested and I've studied the Civil War, I never did a lot of study or reading about the medical aspect of it. There's a lot of surgeons' diaries and letters that are published. I had never read any. I mean, that's not true. I'd read some here and there for certain reasons, but not extensively. So when I came here, I thought, am I going to even like this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is this going to be interesting to me? I mean, we're not talking about like a Model 1842 musket firing buck and ball, and what regiment that was issued to. This is a whole different thing.
right?
But, can you say damn?
You can say
Yeah.
anything you want.
Okay, but damn,
Yeah.
this is interesting stuff.
It really is. And it touches, as much as it's Civil War medicine, it touches so many aspects of the Civil War that we've both been interested
Yeah.
in for so long.
Yeah.
It's Civil War photography. There's the first use of photography to document medical
that's cool.
That is cool.
procedures
Yeah, that's
is
great.
because of Civil War medicine. Women's history,
Yeah.
you've got a total social change here with women being able to be nurses, and have different roles that are outside of the home.
Right.
So it touches that. I mean, it's of course touches conflict, and then the battle histories as well.
And it's like a Civil War medicine, I think, I call it a big, messy step forward
Okay.
because they're so unprepared when the war breaks out.
Right.
And in some ways, they move so radically and revolutionary to change things in 4 years. The medical view or atmosphere of the United States in 1865 is so different than it was in 1861.
Yeah.
Totally different. And the biggest tragedy of Civil War medicine is they don't have an understanding of germ theory.
Right.
It's sort of in a gestation. They don't really follow it. They don't believe it. And if they had germ theory, they would have really,
Right.
But germ theory isn't really accepted until the 1880s, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. That's Garfield's assassination, and that's a whole separate podcast. But
It
but
sure is. And
but
That's
you
an
know,
interesting
it's
topic.
extremely
can-
interesting.
I love it.
I'll
Yes.
give you one.
I love
I'll
the
give you one
Garfield
Yeah.
example. One of the things I've developed these little phrases I say a lot, which I really believe this. Aside from emancipation, which is its own massive movement and change, okay, the easiest way to draw a straight line from the Civil War to the present day and how it impacts our lives is through medicine. It's easy.
great.
And the only example you have to give is ambulances.
Oh yeah. Well, I think you cover that here, don't you?
Yeah, we have a little
Yeah.
bit in there about ambulances because before the Civil War, the United States Army did not use ambulances.
So I want to ask about this because this is like you, right? Like, all my studies, this was something that I didn't come to a lot, right? So
Right.
my basic understanding of this prior to discovering this museum years ago and building my personal community of friends that are in and around this museum community, I basically was like, the Confederates accidentally boiling utensils figured out that works. And that at one point, somebody, probably John Letterman, was like, we can get that guy off the battlefield, like while it's happening.
Yeah.
But I also wonder, like, I obviously know how much of a layman that is and how much of a dumbing down that is. But like, all right, so I work in the 18th century, right?
Yes.
What has changed in the concept of seeing the wounded on the field and having the urgency to need an ambulance system to get them off the field, to get them into these staged hospitals, to create this organization? Because war looks very similar in terms of the weaponry and the tactics. So like, what changed like what light bulb went off where they were like, this has got it? Was it just the scale?
Well,
Yeah,
a lot of this goes back, honestly, to the Crimean War in the 1850s. And have you ever heard of the Delafield Commission?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Delafield Commission consisted of 3 officers, including a young Captain George McClellan.
Right.
Okay. And one is Delafield. The other one, his last name is Marcy. Boy, I'm drawing a blank. These 3 officers, 2 of them are quite a bit older than McClellan. And in true McClellan fashion, after this, he says, I don't want to ever get stuck with such old guys again for so long, something like that. But they're sent over there to study warfare. And they write a report, the Delafield Commission report, which is published in the late 1850s. And in that, they talk about how the Europeans fight war, and they have an extensive section on medical practices.
Nice.
And they have engravings in there of British ambulances and French ambulances. And you know what the French do? The French have aid stations close to the front lines with ambulances as close as possible, where they patch guys up, send them to field hospitals that are in tents, kind of close to the front lines. And when they're done there, they go to general hospitals or more permanent hospitals in mostly urban areas.
So is that triage?
It
Right.
goes, well,
Right.
triage is sort of what we would call the aid station.
So, but that's like the thing the French set up, the first thing, right?
Yeah. And so
Did they call it triage?
they didn't call it triage at the time, but basically that report is published in the late 1850s, and right after that, you have the United States Army. Well, let's try to make an ambulance, and one of the first ambulances is a tripler, which is a converted sort of quartermaster corps wagon that required 6 horses, right? 4 or 6, I think. At least that many, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Big, heavy, bulky thing. And that was the beginning of experimenting with ambulances in the United States Army. So when the war begins, I mean, Jonathan Letterman we're talking about, who was in his 40s during the Civil War and who kind of becomes one of the prominent medical directors. He will become the medical director of the Army of the Potomac in the spring of 62. It's a little convoluted, but I have to say, like, Letterman studied at the medical school that McClellan's dad ran. So McClellan knew him from before the war, and they both had another friend in common named William Hammond.
Okay.
Okay. So, Battle of First Manassas takes place. It's a big mess. The wounded are on the field for, depending on who you read, a week to 10 days. Okay.
Wow.
There's stories of guys having amputations near Manassas and having to walk back to D.C. because they couldn't get transportation.
Wasn't it at Manassas just a few years ago where they uncovered like a whole
Yes.
pile of?
Yes.
Yeah, the
Surgeons.
Melissa,
yeah.
you,
Surgeon's
want, you want to
pit,
talk
yeah.
about that? Because Melissa tried to find it.
I would love to hear about that
She
story.
tried to
yeah.
find it. She runs on the battlefield, and then she's like, I think I found it. And then,
Ever
I
since
was
I've heard about this, I've
determined
been
to
like,
find out where that was located. Yes. So I believe actually was 2017 or 2018
Okay.
when they actually uncovered it, and they were doing some work on the battlefield, putting in electricity in a shed or something like that, and in doing so, uncovered a surgeon's pit.
Yeah.
And in the surgeon's pit, I don't know the exact contents, but they found some amputated limbs, and so that is the only surgeon's pit that has ever been found
Right.
on a Civil War battlefield.
The only one?
Yeah, they found
only
like
one.
two full sets of remains, and I think those gentlemen were reinterred in Arlington Cemetery.
They were,
Yeah.
yes.
But yeah, that the big relevance was that this was a surgeon's pit because
Right.
there was
Yes.
lots of like feet and hands.
I mean,
things
it's
like
almost
that.
impossible to think that they've not uncovered one somewhere else when you think about 60,000 amputations
Well, let me.
and all the different battlefields and how much digging there has been done.
Right.
Well, here's something Parker and I have learned in our pursuit of history and things like that. So, back in the initial months of the pandemic, when we were all sitting at home, and then it morphed into, okay, you can go out but be away from other people.
Yeah.
Parker and I, Titanic is a huge part of the history of our show. We've covered
Right.
it at length.
Okay.
There are
Length?
there
Huh?
are
It's a long ship.
there are a couple survivors of
It's a
the.
pretty big story.
You're fired. You're fired right now.
this is terrible. You guys got fired.
Yeah, right on the show.
Right on show.
There are a couple survivors that are buried locally. There's people that survived the shipwreck.
wow.
There's a couple. There's one or two. Interestingly, the postmaster on the Titanic is from like Fairfax.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Really?
So
I know that.
very likely the first person to die in the disaster is the Fairfax postmaster. But
Wow.
I digress. There is a woman named Ada Ball who survived the wreck. She was a second class passenger. She's buried in Baltimore, and so we were like, well, we can't do anything normal, and we're building this White Star Line episode for the podcast. Let's go see if we can find her grave, pay our respects. I've
Yeah.
never stood at the grave of anything
Titanic
Titanic related.
survivor.
ever.
Oh, yeah, that's
so we
cool.
get out there, and lucky for us, the greenskeeper, the groundskeeper, the guy that oversees the cemetery, he runs into us because he's like, "What the hell are these two random dudes doing?" I guess we look suspicious.
I
Just
can't
yeah.
imagine why.
middle
you
of
think
a
that.
Baltimore
Those
neighborhood.
people look like future
You guys-
podcasters.
Yeah, so
You guys looking suspicious.
so he
Come
came
on.
up to us to check us out, and after we were talking for a while, he started telling us about Ada because she's one of the notable burials and things. Like, we learned basically, unless you're encompassed in a concrete sarcophagus, so your coffin goes into this concrete thing that they kind of seal over,
Yeah.
and you're also well preserved, within like 60 years in normal ground conditions, the bones are going to be gone. So when you say like you'd be surprised, I'm like, I'm actually not, because I have this random nugget about how bodies decompose in the
Okay,
ground because
okay.
we met this random grave keeper.
Right.
What do we call him? He's not a grave digger, but he like oversees.
Why don't we call him the Crypt Keeper?
Yeah, the crypt keeper. You're digging up lots of childhood trauma right now, Dana. My dad would be like, he's not scary. And then I would be like, but I'm having nightmares that says he's terrifying.
Yes.
So, about
Hey,
that,
look that one up, young kids. If you don't know what that is, look that one up.
Crypt Keeper.
Yeah.
I'd say that's one
But anyway,
big story.
So in a serious, God damn it. So in a serious way, that's just one of the things that stuck out when you're like, you'd be surprised. I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel like not, because I feel like so many
Yeah,
of
that
those
is
just are
interesting.
gone.
Yeah.
I for some reason, because
That's the end of my science, by the way.
Okay.
That's all I know.
For some reason, I've always been fascinated by this find, and
Yeah.
I don't know enough about it. Do we? Because like Pat said, they've reinterred the two full bodies in
Correct.
Arlington.
Arlington.
Do we know are they in the tomb of the unknown, or do we know who they are? And follow up question: do we know who any of the limbs belong to, thanks to DNA or anything like that, or is this just like some
So,
poor bugger just lost their arms and here they are?
No, as far as I know, they did some testing and they're pretty sure they can identify
Awesome.
at least regimentally where they,
yeah.
are from.
Yeah.
But in talking to some of the rangers, I live right next to Manassas, so
And I was volunteering heavily at the time there, so that was a big deal. So I was around
Yeah.
the park
yeah,
when
they
that was
did a
happening.
lot of testing. I know they were limited in the amount of DNA testing that they could do because of the United States Army. They belong to the United States
Yeah.
Army.
Right,
They did
so the
not belong to
Army-
the Manassas Park.
Well, didn't want him to go.
They
too far
Yeah,
for
they
whatever
restricted some of the testing, and
yeah,
I
they
think
did.
they
Yeah,
were
I bet.
very close
Yeah.
to, with the testing that they did have, to probably identifying them, and I think they probably are pretty sure they know who the identifications are. They really, actually, just this last year, went back in to the surgeon's pit, reopened it up, and found more.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I didn't hear anything. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
that's
Yeah.
very recent, and they're still right now putting the report together to come out with the findings. But they have now pulled everything out of that surgeon's pit. That is done.
Obviously, you guys are paying attention to that. with
Oh yeah,
extreme earnest.
they were able to determine through something in the bones that
the water that they would have consumed. Mineral deposits.
The minerals, whatever, places them in the
Certain
eastern
regions,
New York,
yeah.
western Massachusetts region. of
That's what I
origin.
thought I heard.
How fascinating is that?
That's
where we're at.
incredibly
160 years in,
fascinating.
we can tell what kind of
Right.
water they were drinking.
And so,
Yep,
if
I
you
think that's
extrapolate
really
from
cool.
that,
But
what
my IT
regiments
department can't fix my
were
computer,
raised
but
in
that's-
that
I
area, and where they ended up fighting on the battlefield, you could probably start getting closer and closer.
Somebody knows who they are.
I-
At
Somebody knows
this
who they
point,
are.
I bet you somebody knows. It might not be
No.
us, but somebody knows their
Right,
names.
somebody
Yes,
knows.
they do. I mean, the Park Service itself is literally says like they're pretty close or
Yeah,
sure that
yeah,
they've got lists.
All right, listen. If you're listening, give up the records.
Give it
all
up.
right? Give up the
Give it up.
records. Top secrets. Time to declassify.
It's been
So
160 years, everybody.
There was a report that came out about the first findings, and that was just last year. So that was a precursor to them going back to dig up the rest of the
Right.
pit and get everything out so that they could.
And this is for like the limbs as well as the bodies, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Like, wow. Okay.
So, Melissa, what's it
Wow.
like for you working in sort of the medical? Like before, you guys were in this Civil War community, and you could focus almost in any direction you wanted to, found interesting, whatever. What's it like for you to kind of be working in this? I don't want to say filter or funnel, but this lens where most of our conversation is going to have that. What's that been like for you?
I found it fascinating, honestly. I'm a very curious person, so I think it's been really interesting to learn more of the medical aspects. And really, I think, again, like I was saying, the innovation that happens with Civil War medicine touches so many pieces of the history that it draws lines to everything that I find interesting anyways. I mean, honestly, the Garfield story is a perfect example.
Yeah.
I mean, I find his story fascinating. I've loved reading about him, and when you start to talk about Civil War medicine, direct line to him.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention that his doctor is the same doctor who treated Rollins. So,
Oh, well, there you go. You were like,
there's-
well,
like-
old friend.
yes,
Garfield's doctor during the Civil War was the supervising surgeon of the Armory Square Hospital in D.C.
right,
Oh,
Dr. Bliss.
interesting.
Dr. Bliss.
His first name is literally Doctor.
So are you mad at Dr. Bliss because when Rawlings wasn't feeling well towards the end of his
Yeah.
life, you're like, you didn't do enough. You could have done more.
Honestly, knowing that he was Garfield's doctor actually does seem to me like, well, he had some shady practices, so maybe Rollins could have lived longer if he would have given him some different treatment.
But didn't Rollins also decide that he was like not going to do, because like wasn't he out west and then like, I'm going to come back east, but probably shouldn't,
Absolutely.
but I'm going to
And
do it anyway.
Yeah, again, that's one of my favorite stories about Rollins was when Grant becomes president, he decides that he's going to help Rollins because everybody knows he's sick at this point.
Right.
I mean, he dies 8 months after he gets into the administration.
Or he
of
says
Grant.
something like, and so he shall be.
Yes,
right?
and so Grant is going to make him head of the department out west during his administration. And James Wilson goes to deliver this news to Rollins to tell him Grant has decided that you're going to be in charge of the department out west. And Rollins turns around and says, "No, I should be Secretary of War."
Yeah.
And Wilson goes back to Grant, delivers that news, and Grant says, "You can tell him he shall be Secretary of War."
That's right.
But really, it's because Grant is trying to get him to go out west because he feels, as other people do as well, that warm, dry air helps people with consumption or,
There's got to be something to it, just because I know I feel better when I'm breathing in salty beach air. So I know that stuff probably helps.
I think it probably constricts or restricts your blood vessels, and so you feel like you can breathe better.
It's
but
funny.
It clearly doesn't cure tuberculosis.
It's funny how you mentioned that, you kind of think that you're going to live in one box or one bubble with, this is a medical story, but you find that it touches so many other
well,
things.
that's like, kind of, if getting back to the ambulance thing.
Yeah.
So, Letterman in the winter of '61 is in the Western Virginia Department of Western Virginia with Major General William Stark Rosecrans. And Rosecrans is an engineer, and he basically is like, look, these ambulances we have are not cutting it. They're too big, they're too heavy. So Letterman and Rosecrans sat down and designed an ambulance. and it was 4 wheels. It only required 2 horses instead of the 6, and it could carry the rear of it was reconfigurable so it could hold 6 to 8 seated casualties or 2 to 4 prone on a platform. And they start building these things in Wheeling, and they're called either the Rosecrans or Wheeling Ambulance.
Interesting.
And they become the most commonly used ambulance of the Civil War. Thousands of them were made.
Is that what you guys have reproduced over on the Pry Farm?
We have a reproduction. I should mention, we have 2 satellite locations we administer. The Clara Barton Missing Soldiers Office in Washington, D.C., which we can chat about. And also we help interpret the Pry Field Hospital on the Antietam battlefield at the Pry Farm. And the barn out there was a Israel Richardson 2nd Corps Division hospital. And in that barn right now is our full-scale Rosecrans ambulance reproduction, and we have a 3/4 scale Rucker. That's named after Brigadier General Daniel Rucker, who was the commander of the Washington Depot. That's a later war ambulance. But the Rosecrans is used through the Indian War period. And from not having any ambulances at all, right, they start producing the heck out of these things, and the Confederacy follows suit. They always short on ambulances, but they copy the Rosecrans or use captured ones to do what they can. And then we kind of were talking about Manassas and the debacle of the Union the wounded being left on the field. Well, public pressure begins to mount on the Lincoln administration through the Sanitary Commission,
Right.
the civilian agency, which is an odd sort of like friends group to the government. I don't think you could have something quite like that today.
No, it's not efficient. It would be cut.
It would be cut.
Yes.
And so they would say, look, and they were putting pressure on Stanton, and the name of the Surgeon General at the time honestly escapes me, but he was an older guy, and they got him forced out, and William Hammond put in his place, and Hammond is in his 40s. Okay?
All right.
But remember, before this thing ends, I want to recap what happens to Hammond and Letterman. Okay?
All right.
So Hammond gets in there as Surgeon General. He goes to McClellan, who is the commander of the Army of the Potomac, and he says, I'm going to give you a new medical director, and it's Jonathan Letterman. So Letterman goes out of the peninsula and works with McClellan. Now, McClellan has been on that Delafield Commission and appreciates medical reform and kind of works with Letterman to establish orders that restructure how camps are laid out, how often latrines are maintained, okay? And in August of 1862, at the end of that summer, Letterman and McClellan will issue General Orders number 147, establishing an ambulance corps for the Army of the Potomac.
Wow. Which is game changer.
Game changer.
Everything.
And by Gettysburg, you have, each corps has 200 ambulances in the Army of the Potomac. I mean, it's huge, right? And they take the administration of the ambulance corps away from the quartermaster department and make its own department with its own trained ambulance corps personnel, changing the entire structure of this thing. And eventually, later in the war, that was just the Army of the Potomac, but by the end of the war, an ambulance corps is established throughout all Union armies. The Confederates follow suit as well as they can, too. They organize and structure ambulances. But the kicker is, the war ends, and immediately after the war ends, Cincinnati, Ohio establishes a civilian ambulance service.
Wow.
Like the 911 one today.
That's the beginning. Yeah.
Now, they're not 911 accessible, but the same. It's
because
for us at home.
Cincinnati was a big Union hospital deep location for the Western Theater.
Right.
Boom, right away. And then New York City follows after that. And from no ambulances in American life or military, they quickly start to become fixtures. And my little thing now I like to say is, when you hear ambulance siren, that's the Civil War talking to you. That's a direct line.
Oh, that's cool.
That's
a
neat.
direct line. You can't get much clearer. Before the Civil War,
that's cool, dude.
No ambulances. During the Civil War, ambulance explosion. After the Civil War, ambulance services.
So let me take an American lens off of this conversation.
Yes.
Because obviously these are things that were implemented in Crimea. McClellan observes some of these things. I don't want to say we're behind, but Europe has been engaged in warfare a lot longer and a lot more consistently than we are. And I know that the reason for these observers to go over there was because we need some West Pointers to get some experience, like eyes-on experience.
Right.
When did these start showing up on other battlefields? Is it the Crimea the first time we see it? Because
I don't know as much. I'm still learning a lot of this stuff, but I can tell you that the first ambulances, sort of specific vehicles for wounded personnel, is a French invention during the Napoleonic Wars.
Okay.
Is
And
there anything that didn't happen during that Napoleonic time?
by the time of the Crimea,
Right.
by the Crimean War, the Brits have them. All the warring parties pretty much have them over there. And there was actually a sanitary commission publication. I think it's 64. Have we the best ambulance service? And it's not necessarily what you think. You might think that's about administration, but that in that booklet, it argues that we should adopt the British pattern ambulance, which is depicted in the Delafield Commission report. And it had a little rack hanging from the ceiling where soldiers could throw their knapsacks and guns.
Well, that's kind of neat, though.
And they said, because these guys end up at the hospital and they have to leave all their personal belongings behind, and
Right.
their guns are left behind, and the enemy can take the guns. Now, it never happened, but that there's sort of debate and thought going on all of a sudden about what's the best ambulance here in America, that sort of thing.
Because one of the things that's in my mind is it's like whether you're talking with your American lens on or just your global
Right.
lens. I mean, between us and Europe, there's been almost constant conflict from the 17th century onward,
Yeah.
right? And knowing from a military like weapons tactics kind of conversation that the Mexican War is still being fought with flintlock style weapons that would be
yeah.
familiar to our revolutionary ancestors. It's like, what is and I think that's maybe I'm asking the same question, but like the importance of the Crimea is just like what changed? Because it's like they've seen some of this stuff before. They've seen the armies grow. They've seen. That's why you and I, when you heard you say yes, like I asked, was it just the scale of it that people
I
were
think
like,
that's very true.
something
I mean,
has to change?
Yes.
Absolutely. The scale of these these
They're just getting
battles, they
bigger.
just
They're
get
just big,
bigger
right.
and bigger. And with no system in place, the drastic need for organization is just so apparent.
Right.
Dana, one of the things you mentioned a moment ago got my brain thinking. I'm a very visual learner, like a lot of people are, and I often come to the, what battle would I like to see? And I always have a million things, but there's all these different non-battle things I would like to see if I could time travel. The logistics of like just each corps having its own 200 wagon
Yeah, I think so too.
ambulance. Like, just what does that look like?
Well,
what does Lee's 40-mile long
That's-
train look like? Things
yeah.
like that I want to see.
People have asked me, and I've thought, if I could go back in time to the Civil War, I don't know if I'd want to see a battle because I think it would just be such a gore fest, horrible. I don't know if I could cope with it. So I have 3 things I've always thought I'd like to see. I would like to wander around the Brandy Station winter encampment and see what that was like and how they organized and all that cool stuff. I'd like to see an army on the march go by, Union or Confederate, and I'd like to see Lincoln's second inaugural. One of those 3 things, which is just I'm kind of rolling on here, but anyway, yes, to see that scale of an officer, like a junior officer, captain or lieutenant, they're in charge of like hundreds of ambulances all of a sudden,
Right.
And that just is so quick, right? From 0 to that's the way it is by the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so too. I mean, again, and this is where these sort of demand starts to really spark innovation, social change, record keeping on a scale that was just not prevalent before this. And it is because of this scale. There's a desperate need for innovation.
Right on the wall over there, you see that series of green books?
Yes.
So that's the medical and surgical history of the Civil War. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the official records of the Civil
Yes,
War, right?
the ORs.
The ORs.
The famous
Yeah.
ORs.
The famous ORs, which are sort of the bedrock of everything and full of Well, that's a medical OR, basically.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
And that was at the direction of Hammond and subsequent Surgeon General to start keeping these records, compiling these records, what surgeries worked, who was hit by what projectile, extensive record keeping that really hadn't been done in this country before, because it's so localized, right? Some local doctor might have a leather-bound thing he writes notes down in, but
Right.
this is published and available to the world, and it really begins, the world really looking at the United States as a leader in medical advances because of this series, and they're trying to figure out what worked, what didn't work.
Yeah, they begin to collect specimens. They take specimens, send them home from the battlefield. And that's the genesis of the National Museum of Health and Medicine as well.
We have learned that gnarly things happen on battlefields
Yeah.
after the battle. Sometimes they are in pursuit of greater endeavors like
Right.
science. Sometimes they're like when Dr. Jim Broomall brings stories about how Sullivan Ballou is absolutely butchered in death.
That's a brutal
Yeah, weird
story.
stuff happens on the battlefield. Melissa, something that I think you'll just appreciate the serendipity of it all. When we first scheduled this a couple weeks back, the day that I scheduled it started with my daughter telling me, by the way, we learned about this lady, Florence Nightingale, at school yesterday. And I thought that was just so cool that it's like,
Right.
what are the odds that
Yeah,
like I'm
that's
about
neat.
to do a podcast relative to this? And so
Yeah.
women are a huge part of the story of Civil War medicine and on beyond, obviously. But can you tell us about how you lift up those voices here? Because Dr. John Letterman was probably the only name I was familiar with just generally prior to learning about the museum and kind of diving in years ago. And then being from Maryland and visiting Antietam my whole life, we know all about Clara Barton, but there's
Right.
so much more to medicine as far as than Letterman's and Clara Barton's. Can you tell us about just some of the other either women or just how you're engaging with that story here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things, and this is, I think, one of the things that's going to be really neat about when we get finished with the redesign or start to put that in. Right now, we follow a soldier's story through the museum, and then, of course, you hear these larger themes about Jonathan Letterman and some of those themes, but we're really going to be incorporating a lot more of these other stories into the museum through this redesign, including nurse stories, women's history, the African American surgeons, and even Confederate surgeons and other stories, citizens, civilians. How are they impacted by, the war and Civil War medicine? So we're going to start incorporating some of those stories
That's awesome.
in a lot more. And it really is a massive change for social change for women during the Civil War. They're not allowed to be nurses at the beginning of the war. It's an unseemly profession, but if really in the home, they are the caretakers, they are the nurses.
Which I find so interesting that you say that, because I know that to be true, but it's like in wars past, they serve as nurses. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the British military, which, I mean, as much as Americans hate to hear it, almost everything we do here is born out of British systems. The British have women working as nurses. The British
Right.
have them officially on the muster roll. So they're not even just
Yeah.
like that side hire, like their
Yeah.
military roster.
Right.
So it's like, it's funny that, here we are, from the world that I'm referencing is like 1750 to 1790. And here we
Agreed.
are
Right.
like a
Yeah.
generation or two later. And it's
Yeah.
like, you can't be a nurse.
Yeah.
Well, the division of labor kind of comes in, that changes between the 18th century to the Civil War. And
Sure.
so you can kind of create a woman's sphere to some extent. But, on rural farms, north and south before the war, these women are, tending their ill husbands.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
they're doing all
Right.
this stuff. But there were no nursing schools in the United States before the Civil War.
None at all.
None. And when we say nurses, we should clarify that they're not nurses maybe the way that we think of a nurse. These are women that there are various levels of them. There are
Right.
some that do administer medicine and change bandages and things of that
yes.
nature.
Yeah.
But a lot of these women are humanitarians, and they come and they feed guys and cook them food, which is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Don't get
Yes.
me wrong. And
They do like the water dressing.
Right, they
Maybe,
clean
things
the
like
wounds
that.
clean the
Yeah,
wounds, and
absolutely.
they cook meals, and that I have become such a fan, and you'll have to tell them about the exhibit we're going to do at Clara Barton,
Oh, yeah.
but of these women, and a lot of them are middle class educated women. Okay, if you're a farm wife in Georgia with 3 kids, you're probably not going to be able to nurse.
Yeah, you can't go off to the war.
Yeah,
Right.
but if you're a rich sort of or upper middle class woman from Richmond or New York City, you're not married yet, right? You're right at that age. So because of that, a lot of these nurses are well educated, and they left a rich historiography, a rich body of literature, letters and published
First-person
memoirs,
accounts,
first-person
yes.
accounts of what they went through. And let me tell you, I mean, these women saw just about as much gore and devastation as the soldiers. The only difference is, and it's a huge difference, but they weren't being shot at, but they saw shredded bodies. They saw ghastly sights. They saw devastating stuff. It wasn't uncommon for some of these women to have PTSD, what we would call PTSD.
Yeah.
Some died of disease as well. I mean, they went through hell.
Yeah.
It was really hard stuff. And I've got tremendous admiration. There's about 20,000, they think, that served in the North and 20,000 in the South in some capacity.
There's this experience that I've been going through with my exploration of history personally, where it has evolved and re-evolved, and it just keeps doing that. But when I first started, I was constantly exploring stories that felt like they could relate to me.
Yes.
So that, like, how would I experience
Yes.
said moment in time?
Right.
Yeah.
And the first time in my more, like, what I would say is my more professional way of approaching history, because I've always been an amateur, always been an enthusiast, but like years ago, I started trying to polish up a bit, right?
Yeah.
I was standing at Grace Episcopal Church in Bethesda, Maryland. There's a communal grave of 17 Confederate dead that were left behind from the Monocacy campaign from Early's guys. But in that same cemetery is the grave of a World War I nurse. Her name was Margaret Canby. And she died at 18 years old. And after looking her up, she'd already done 2 years of service in the Marine Corps as a nurse.
Wow.
And that just kind of was, I started to think about just the concept of, man, when I was 16,
Yeah.
I couldn't police anything. And when I was 18, I couldn't police.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, this young woman's going through hell, with the Americans. So then that kind of lived in the back of my head. Now I'm the father of 2 daughters.
Right.
And so my number one mission in life is to create a world that they have every place at every opportunity and everything. So whenever I'm researching things that are of my own interest, I'm always finding myself finding something that my daughters will hopefully find interesting or enlightening or inspirational, something like that. And it was in this conversation about nursing where really I started to find like that thread of, the fingerprints are on everything. It's not just medicine. It's on social changes.
Yes.
It's on the studies of things like psychologies and things like that. So this is something that's very important to me because it's going to be, this museum, this work you're doing is going to be helpful to me just as a father.
I mean, and when the redesign, and if we don't talk about the museum itself, I'll get fired by David.
You got to talk about it.
I
felt like that was a given. We'd get there,
I know. It's just we've already had a firing here. It's unnerving.
David's not going to fire you.
I know. Well, you just fired. Parker.
I did fire Parker.
Yeah,
you rehired at half the wage.
I'm still here though. Oh, half the wage?
Yeah.
Oh.
0 times 0 divided in half.
This is like the government. He's fired. He's back. He's fired. He's back.
For less
very
money.
efficient.
For less money.
The moral of the story is it's all very efficient.
Yeah.
The firing and the rehiring of Parker is all.
It's all very.
And don't ask any questions.
Okay.
No.
And I'm actually gonna ask for overtime.
You should.
Honestly,
You should.
Time and a half of my current
To
pay.
the man behind the
Right.
curtain. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Cornelia Hancock is one of my favorite examples. Cornelia Hancock is a teenager. She's a Quaker. She lives in this. I went to, Melissa was with me. We went to where she was born in this. It's kind of like across the Delaware River from Philly in New Jersey, sort of in that area. But it's this sort of storybook place. She grew up on a tidal creek. It's just beautiful and pastoral and peaceful. And she was a stout abolitionist. And even though she's a Quaker, she literally snuck away from home to go to Philadelphia to get on a train to go help nurse after Gettysburg. Because there were local boys from New Jersey that she wanted to, try to somehow help. And she left accounts of this. Her letters are published south after Gettysburg. And she goes there and her initial reaction is just the smell that you encountered before you got to the field hospital. And then by the winter camp of 1863, this teenage Quaker sort of is, just matter-of-factly talking about a skirmish that occurred. A wounded Union cavalryman was come in. They amputated his leg, and they gave his amputated limb to the surgeons to practice additional amputations on.
I mean, that's like both cool and also super gnarly.
Yeah.
She just mentions it as a matter of course. This is what happened today.
Yeah, because as we have explored this concept, and we were told very bluntly by a friend of mine who's a combat veteran that your situation's not normal. And so what becomes normal to you
Right.
is very different than what's normal to
Yeah.
us sitting at
Yeah.
home
Right.
reading
Yeah.
said paper,
Right.
reading
Yeah.
said whatever.
Yeah, and you see these. It happens to these women.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
You know?
absolutely.
I mean, guys die in their arms, or they're holding a guy's hand who dies almost every day in some cases.
Plus, one of the things that I think kind of boggles my mind is the strength I find in that there are so many women who are serving who have sweethearts, husbands, brothers, anybody, people they love.
Yeah.
That are serving in these ranks, not necessarily in their units, not necessarily even in their theater, but it's
Right.
like, I have to care for you while you are a literal bloody mess in front of me.
Right.
And wondering if my beloved is in somebody else's arms in the same capacity. I've said it before. I'm a pretty strong guy. I'm not that strong. And that's why I'm always envious of people like you, like my wife, because it's like, you guys can endure so much. Biologically, in every way, the better, superior, smarter sex. I'm highly aware of this. But it's like things
You
like
can come back any day.
thanks. But it's like things like that just make me like I'm in awe of it. So I'm excited to see you guys tell a lot more of those stories here.
Yeah.
This museum has changed a lot since I came here. I think the first time I came here was 2013. Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe 2012.
Okay.
Maybe even later. A young Jake Winn was still here.
Young Jake
He was
Winn.
still a college student, Jake Winn, I believe.
Yeah.
So it was quite some time ago. He's still a young guy, but it was,
He's still a young guy.
he's in his
He
30s
is,
now.
right.
So
Yes.
He now works for Frederick County Tourism.
got to remind him that he's getting
Yeah,
older. He's got a 3 in his age on the front digit.
Oh.
But yeah, so like, but when I came here, I think it was, like you said, it was a walkthrough of the soldier experience. And at the end of it, it was like, by the way, there's so much more than just how the soldiers engaged. And now it's
Right.
like, you can see that in more places. Question for you guys, as you do all these upgrades, are you guys going to get rid of the door, the medical surgical door that was on display? I think it was from like Cedar Creek.
The table. That's
Yeah,
the
but wasn't
surgeon's table.
it a door?
It's a table.
was a
Oh, it was a table? I thought it was a door
kitchen
that they just kind of
table.
flattened
No,
down.
it's a table.
It's a table?
Yeah.
And it was brought out on the
I should
on
come
their
more often.
porch. Yeah, the Daniel Stickley family.
You're not getting rid of that table, right?
We are definitely not.
You're going to leave it on display?
No.
Absolutely.
It's going to stay on display.
You guys going to
Yes.
still have the cool but also creepy mannequins?
Some, and we're going to upgrade some of them as
Oh, like
well.
Disney animatronics?
In fact, we're going to upgrade some
No.
of them in the same way that we're upgrading the stories here. We're going to be
Right.
bringing in an African American mannequin. You know, we're going to be upgrading some of the features of some of the mannequins and some of the.
Basically, in a very short version of this, we're going to be incorporating more information to make it more of a actual national story,
Right.
and we're going to be bringing in more stories about women nurses,
Yes.
how African Americans were impacted by this medical revolution and disease, a terrible disease in contraband or refugee camps. It's the same thing suffered by the soldiers, as well as more Confederate stuff.
My brain is making me ask you this very impulsive question. Have either of you watched the television show Copper?
No, but I
No.
have heard of it.
Maybe you should, because one of the best characters, one of the best written characters I've seen in any genre of anything is a African American doctor who's in that show, and he's a very prominent character in the show. His practice of medicine is a very prominent feature of the show.
Okay.
But it what that does is it highlights two things. One, they are a part of this conversation,
Yes.
Right.
and two, they highlight a lot of the hurdles. Like this character writes a paper that kind of helps revolutionize medicine in a certain way, but
Okay.
because he's an African American, so he has to like publish it pretending to be a white guy.
Right.
Things like that. So it highlights a lot of things.
Interesting.
So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. I love the show. Unfortunately for the show, you can tell they got canceled halfway through the second season because it was like things are going great, and then suddenly it was like, let's tie it in a bow in 3 episodes, guys.
Yeah.
Which sucked, but
Yeah.
but yeah. So his story is very cool, and if you haven't, I highly recommend checking that out.
Well, that sounds a lot like Alexander Augusta.
Yeah.
I wonder if
It
that's
might
who
be
that's based
on
off
him.
of.
Yeah,
Alexander, there were
absolutely.
13 African American male surgeons.
Here's what Copper is. It's every cop drama you've ever seen in your life, but it's set in 1864 New York.
Oh,
And
I've heard about
and
this.
the main protagonist is a veteran of the 71st New
Okay.
York, so he's a Union veteran.
Yeah.
Okay.
And but they're all Irish cops. Man.
Yeah.
It's a tale as old as time, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Tell me,
Okay.
tell me a joke where there's an Irish cop, there's an Irish firefighter, right?
Yeah,
Right.
okay. Yeah, Augusta, like African Americans could not gain a medical education in the United States. They had to go to Canada.
Right.
And then Augusta basically pleaded his case with the Lincoln administration
Right.
and became the first. Boy, I'm right on that, aren't I? He was the first U.S.
African-American
surgeon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, of course, he was given the rank of major, right? That's the rank you carried if you're a surgeon. And so he was beat up on streetcars in D.C. and pulled off and all sorts of stuff. And he had to get basically he experienced racism in the Army. And
Oh, sure.
Stanton had to write a letter saying this guy is a surgeon.
Stop messing with
Stop
them.
messing
Yeah.
with him. He's a real deal. And he will end up becoming the first medical professor at Howard University that Howard University has.
The Howard University,
The Howard,
the
yeah.
Oliver Otis
Yes.
Howard University.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's a story we're going to tell.
I'm
Yeah.
excited for you guys.
Yeah,
When
it
is
is
the?
I'm glad
exciting.
someone is.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys are too. You guys are just in the weeds of it all right
Oh
now.
yeah, it's
I
really
just like-
exciting.
I'd be more excited, except I just got fired.
Yeah, you're
I
right.
know. Well, I
It is
know.
hard to be
I'm
excited
sorry.
when
Yeah.
you've
I'm
been
sorry.
fired, your
Yeah,
mic's been
yeah.
turned off.
Yeah.
But
So, are you guys like all hands on deck with this project? Are you guys doing any sort of side work? Like you said, you hadn't been out in the field all too much. The weather's changing. Are we going to start to see you out in the world a little bit more?
well,
We're gonna try,
We're going to
yeah.
try. The issue is we're working with a design firm,
Oh yeah.
and we're in the concept phase right now.
Okay.
And so we have how many books do we have? At least 4 different
Yeah,
revisions.
4 or 5 revisions.
Big thick books of what the museum's going to look like, and it's a back and forth process.
oh yeah.
And so Melissa is finding hundreds of images. That's one of her tasks. And
Talents, I should say.
and talents,
because,
yeah.
That was like the first thing I learned about you.
no,
Was fantastic photographer. Also, incredible understanding
Listen,
and an eye for Civil War
no
photographs.
one,
and beyond.
no one can find. I will look for an image. I can't find this, and in 36 seconds, she's got it. It's incredible. She's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that's not what you say
That's
when they're
very
not.
nice.
Yeah, she said no.
Thank you.
Usually, she's like, "I am." No,
You should
Oh, no, the
never be
Melissa
humble.
voice is out.
Never be
I do
humble.
my Melissa voice.
He has
I do
a
my
Melissa
Melissa voice.
voice.
My Melissa voice. So, but so my job is to oversee this reinterpretation and what's the word? Delegate other people to write stuff, get it back, edit it. I'm writing my own stuff, send it to them. They lay it out in various whatever how it's going to look, and it gets worked on again and again. So it's a lot of writing, and exhibit writing is hard.
Yeah.
Because it has to be short and powerful
Yeah.
and get to
Short
the point
writing
real
is
quick.
difficult.
So
That is probably my lesson right now in the museum world is Fort Frederick has also done a lot of updating, and thankfully most of that stuff falls to my boss to do. But we just did a Civil War Trails revamp of our signage that we have out there.
Sure, yeah.
And though I'm not the original author of the signs out there. The original author is my boss, and he heavily involved me in the
Right.
rewrite of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
And it was insane how much
Yeah.
back and forth, just a single panel. Just
For 200 words.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was nuts
it's-
how often we
it's-
sent that
it's
back and forth.
because you want it to be short, but you also don't want it to be boring.
Right.
So
Or
how do you
leave stuff out.
leave
You
Right.
want
that?
it to come.
It's just
Yeah.
sometimes it's like
Well, that's the challenge for me is like I have all of these things that are important.
right.
How do I decide this is not as important and it should
Yeah.
be dropped? It's like,
It can be brutal.
well, I feel like all of us would just paper the world with panels. Like there'd be like thousands
Oh,
of
yeah.
panels everywhere. Like
That sounds great
they
to
all
me.
say they all start with fun facts.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So that's where we are now. We're writing text.
We're working
We-
with a design firm that also did work with Adams County Historical Society in
Oh, and they're
Gettysburg.
huge new.
Cool.
The Beyond the Battle Museum. Yes.
Cool.
Uh-huh.
Very neat.
And
we
they
can
also
mention
did
her
the
name. Healy Kohler.
Yeah, Healy Kohler is
Healy
their
Kohler
name.
Design.
And they've got some really great ideas. The concept drawings are just so exciting to see.
When
and
do you
to see.
plan on like what is the target? It's all done.
It's a couple-year process.
Sure.
So we'll start with a couple of
Multi-million
smaller.
dollars. We're raising money.
Yeah, we're in the raising money phase. We're in right now the concept phase where we're taking a lot of the ideas that have come to fruition and putting text, photos, and that into it so that they can start to make the construction documents that will then basically dictate
Yeah.
the size of a sign, the size of the platforms that hold the signs, the lighting that goes around it. So right now it's a lot of upfront, work like that.
Yeah, you're
just
building the
to-
project before
Yeah.
you build the project.
Yeah.
And you, to be clear, you guys are, excuse me, you guys are still open throughout this entire process,
We want to
right?
stay open through
Okay.
the whole process. Of course, we're going to be working sort of in areas. It's broken down right now into 5 different areas of the
Okay.
museum. And we're really hoping to just do phases where we just shut maybe a section down. Some of those will be easier than others. You know, if you've ever been through the museum and seen our camp life, it's completely sectioned off. It'll be easy to put a
Right.
fence of some sort or sign up that says don't go past this.
Well, I was going to
And be
say,
able to walk through
legally
the rest
speaking,
of
all
it.
you have to do is put up a sign that says "Pardon our dust," and everybody will get what's going on. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
working.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So that's our hope, and our goal really is to try to stay open through it. We might have to close off sections of it or charge reduced admission if you can only see half the museum at a time. It'll be sort of a case-by-case basis. once
Does
we
your
start building.
and obviously you'll react to how the experience goes. Does
Right.
the new museum vibe and look feature the guess how many socks are in here display? Do you guys know about that display? There was a bloody sock display here for a very long time.
We still have the
yeah.
bloody
Is it?
socks.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
guys going to keep that? And
Yes.
It used to be like a thing, like guess how many socks, bloody socks
Oh,
were in
I
this
didn't-
thing.
I did not
Oh,
realize
I did
that.
not. I didn't know that.
Yeah, once upon a time, but it wasn't like a game. It was just like a novelty.
But that's
Yeah.
Those socks are still on display. Those were found in Clara Barton's missing soldier's office.
down in DC. Do you want to talk
Yes.
about that site in a minute?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. You want to give it a quick overview?
Yeah, absolutely. The Clara Barton Missing Soldiers Office site in Washington, D.C. is one that we administer. It was a boarding house. Clara Barton moved there 1861, and she worked at the patent office, which was kitty corner from it at the time. When the war breaks out, the Massachusetts, the first casualties of the war start coming into Washington, D.C. She's originally from Massachusetts. So
Okay.
she knows some of those young soldiers, and she immediately begins to tend to them. She rents out some of the rooms in that boarding house besides her own as well, and starts to collect supplies in that space. And again, starts to take them to the front line. About 1864, she starts to hear about a lot of missing soldiers. People know who she is at this point, and they are asking her about missing soldiers. So she writes to Lincoln in order to basically become her own office. It has a different name, but it eventually is shortened to the Missing Soldiers Office, Clara Barton's Missing Soldiers Office. She finds more than 22,000 missing soldiers.
Just like what happened to them.
Right.
Sometimes finding them is they died and were buried here.
Correct.
That's
Obviously,
mostly what she's
Most
doing.
of them
Sure,
are. And
sure.
she finds a lot of them are at Andersonville. She actually goes to Andersonville. She's instrumental in the identification with Dorrance Atwater at Andersonville Cemetery and the
wow.
creation of that cemetery out there. So a lot of the soldiers that she's identified are there. She puts out rolls of missing men in the newspapers, all from that office. She has a staff of about 20 people. Lincoln does say she's officially, able to, in some official capacity, look for missing soldiers. She receives more than 63,000 letters from people looking for their loved ones. And the really cool or interesting part of the story is in 1868, she's sort of wraps up the missing soldiers office. She moves to Europe, and her co-worker at the patent office is also the landlord, and Edward Shaw, and he lives across the hall. He packs up all of her belongings in the attic. In the early 1900s, after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, the codes change in D.C. and
fire suppression codes.
Yeah.
They block off that third floor that she had her office and that she had
Just
lived
like
on.
wall it up, right?
Wall
They
it
just
up.
wall it
Yeah.
up. They don't want to try to bring it up to code. It's too difficult to do. So the people that own the building at the time, they continue to rent out the second and the third floor, but they just wall off that top floor until the 1990s. The GSA buys the building, and they're in 1996 about to tear it down. And they send an inspector, his name is Richard Lyons, to the building just to make sure there's no homeless people living in it, you know,
Sure.
one last inspection before they prepare to demolish the building. He's drawn to the window from some commotion outside
It's on 7th Street.
on 7th
Okay,
and F.
I was getting ready to ask.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
my next
it's
question.
right
Yep.
right by the National Portrait Gallery.
Got it.
And he's drawn to the window. He's looking outside. Says he kind of feels like a tap on his shoulder. Turns around, looks around the room again, and in the ceiling sees an envelope sticking out. He grabs the ladder, gets up there to get the envelope sticking out of this ceiling, and it's addressed to Edward Shaw. And he doesn't know who that is, but he's compelled to go into the attic to find out if there's anything else up there. And there he finds the sign for the Clara Barton's Missing Soldiers Office.
He kind of stuck his hand in there and he felt this metal thing and he pulled it out. And Claire Barton, Missing Soldiers Office, room 9.
And he's like, oh
And
my
he's
God.
like, this has to be saved. So
Yeah.
he starts to sort of under like cover find out as much as he can
Right.
because he doesn't want to get fired.
Oh, tell me about it. I've kind of lived that life
Well,
in a
he
small
sent
way.
Yeah.
letter. Did he send emails or letters? He signed him Edward Shaw.
Yeah, he signed them Edward Shaw. You know, he was sort of investigating what had happened in this building.
Subterfuge.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's very
And it's
surreptitious. I
really
like that.
because of him that building is saved.
Right.
The GSA does decide to save the building.
And that's where they found the bloody socks up in
Up
the
in the
attic. A
attic.
big pile of them. And
Do we know why she saved them, or was it?
we don't really
Insulation.
know. They are they're all very similar, and they're a white cotton sock, which makes me think they were something given out at the hospitals that maybe she had brought back to wash, launder, get reused or something, and then the war ends, and you don't get to it. But that's what I think they are,
Okay.
without any
Yeah.
real
It's
evidence.
possible that
But
they're from Anderson.
there's so many. There's so many.
Yeah,
They
there
had to
are
come
a
from an
lot.
institution where there was a lot of ill people
Wow.
or injured people.
I'm
Wow.
wondering aloud right now, like, I wonder what you said he did a lot of the advocating for saving the building kind of clandestinely. It's like, I wonder if maybe I didn't have the right tact. One of my favorite and saddest roofing stories from my old career was I put a modern architectural shingle on a house that was built in 1683. And I hated every moment of doing it. But the house wasn't historically registered. It was on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, private owner, did not care at all about history.
Right.
I'm the project manager, and I'm like trying to tell like my boss, I'm like, we should shut this job down. This should not be done. And they're like,
You're
you're not.
probably like no other roofer would
Yeah.
care.
No, like literally,
Right.
my boss, like, he literally told me in very plain English that I'm the only asshole who cares about this at all. And I
I'm
said,
sure.
yes. And I
Yeah.
said, but we need people like me because
Yes.
this is
Yeah.
how we lose things.
Absolutely.
And because I worked at the time for a for-profit business, it didn't matter, right?
Right.
So I'm like envious of this Mr. Lyon.
Yeah.
It's like, what? I should have done things differently.
Yeah.
I should have
Well,
gone to work.
Who knows what would happen today? I mean,
Yeah,
it's-
that's true. It
the-
was-
But we reinterpret the 3rd floor of her missing soldiers office, and it's
Right. It's been restored now. The GSA did bring in experts to restore it. Some of those are really cool stories about how they tried to match wallpaper patterns.
Oh, great. I love that stuff.
Yeah, the wallpaper throughout the space is just really neat. And so, and it's
And what's the coolest thing they found in the attic?
Was it a body?
the camp
the crypt
stove.
keeper?
Not a body.
The camp stove?
The camp
The
stove.
camp stove, which we have here.
Oh, you have? Oh, that's kind of
Yes.
neat.
It's pretty neat.
Clara
Camp
Barton's
stoves are-
camp stove that's still encrusted with soot on the inside.
Oh, that's awesome.
Her fires.
Yes.
Collaboratively speaking, one of the things that I'm trying to do very difficultly right now at my job is just work with related sites.
Yeah.
You're also telling this story. Do you guys work with the Claire Barton home at all down there in DC, right off Glen Echo? It's not that far away. I know it's a different agency. In fact, I think that's the federal government at that point. But do you guys
Right.
work with them at all to talk
we
about
have
Claire?
a site administrator down there now who also started in September, and that's one of the things that she's really been good with is reaching out to other sites in Washington D.C. In the area and trying to do some collaborative programming. So
Yeah.
she has been working with some of the people at that site and some of the other ones in the area as well.
Barton's sort of gotten mothballed with COVID.
Sure.
And it's
Sure.
been slow to come back because this museum here in Frederick had to take priority to bring it back, right?
Right.
But we've, as Melissa said, we have a new site manager down there, Madeline Thompson. I knew her name. Very young, very enthusiastic, very smart.
Yeah.
young woman who is reaching out to other agencies like Glen Echo, Barton's House, and doing that sort of thing. So,
Do you guys focus on, since we talked about the fingerprints of everything, right? It's not just Civil War medicine. Do you guys expand outwardly to like medicine maybe relevant to the area, but a little earlier, a little later, things like that?
well, funny you mention that.
Yeah.
We are going to be, if I don't fail at this mission, starting. I'm joking because there's so much to do with this redesign that I shouldn't take on additional stuff, but we're going to hopefully launch in August a 250th series related to medicine.
Oh man, that's awesome.
And so we are going to we're not going to limit it just to the Rev War. But our first speaker is going to be a fellow named John Reese, who wrote about African Americans in the Revolution and some really cool stuff. And he's done some stuff with medicine. So we are going to have a speaker series. I'm not sure how frequently it's going to be, but we're going to talk about the Revolutionary War medical practices. I just have reached out to a guy who's done research on medical care on the USS Constitution during the War of 1812.
Oh, yeah,
that's cool.
Let's go. That's great.
John Reese is
Love
an incredible guy. I would like to meet him one day. I've read a ton of his work.
Yeah.
Doing the bread oven project
Oh,
on
yeah.
my site.
I bet.
He wrote a
That's
lot
why
about
his name sounds
rations
familiar.
and
Yes.
food in the
Yeah.
Continental Army.
You should have him on your podcast because
I would love to.
You should have him on, and I can put you in touch with him because he's got some incredibly fresh information about African American soldiers in the Revolutionary War.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time you made a connection, and I should say thank you to your face because you hooked us up with Patrick Schroeder from.
So that worked out.
That worked out from Appomattox, and we had a great
great.
conversation. He was so ready to do that show. It was great. Like usually when I deal with park rangers,
Yeah.
they're not ready
Right.
to be on podcasts because
Right.
they're like very much in the ranger
Right,
way
right,
of
right,
doing
right,
things.
Right.
And obviously, he's been in the industry. He's been a professional
Oh, yeah.
for so long,
Yeah.
and he knows the story. So he was just like, "How are we doing this today, boys?"
Yeah.
And we had like a great 2-hour chat with him. And
It was
that's
great.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's
it's a great time.
fantastic. But John is a talker, and
hell yeah,
he does some. You can edit this out because you probably don't want this in your podcast. But
Sure.
they have basically found that like virtually every Continental regiment had African Americans in them.
well, yeah, I like telling that story. There's a bunch of racist people in this country that don't want to hear that, but if that's a fact, that should
some
be
of them
talked about.
were rented slaves.
Sure.
Some of them are free, and some of them are rented slaves. It's crazy.
I love these stories. So
Yeah.
you don't have to sell me. You don't got to sell me, brother.
Yeah. No. Well, we listen, and some of these nurses' stories are so.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got
that's a good example too. We are going to be working with Military Images magazine too.
Yes.
Down at Clara Barton Missing
Ron
Soldiers office.
Coddington's Military Images magazine.
Yeah, again, this is what I mean. How this story of Civil War medicine touches so many different aspects of Civil War, and so we're going to be working with Military Images magazine and Ron Coddington, and we're going to putting on a photo exhibit down at Clara Barton Missing Soldiers office that's going to launch on May 24th. It's going to be 20 Civil War nurses, so it's going to be called
We're gonna
Faces of
That's
Civil War
wonderful.
Nurses.
We're going to reproduce their images 6 feet high.
Yeah.
And you're going to walk
That's
in, and
wonderful.
they're going to be staged through the missing soldiers' office, and you'll read and learn their stories, and there'll be speakers for the opening.
The space is so evocative, there because it's this old boarding house. I mean, it's been restored to
Yeah.
its original purpose, and so it just has this just
I believe you.
genuine romantic feel to it.
I
Yeah.
and-
believe
Say
her
quoi?
because of your visual artistry that I know you have the eye for it. I believe you.
Yeah.
I've never been to the missing soldiers office. I've
Well,
never been down there.
That exhibit will travel here eventually too.
Yes.
and
Oh,
they're going to
cool.
be
Should I see it down there though?
Oh, I think
Yeah,
so.
you should see it. You should
Absolutely.
see it there, and it's gonna. We're gonna. We're not sure what it's gonna be like here, but we're gonna have them in the galleries here. I want to try to get them in some of the hospitals that were here after Antietam, and sort of like the nurses return to Frederick, and so like the Lutheran Church. Let's put up some nurses in there and like have an event for at least a weekend where you do a walking tour and take people into these hospital sites, and then they can learn about some of these nurses.
I'm very excited. You guys have so much on your plate right now that I almost feel bad about to ask my next question. You've been here for a year, over a year now, coming up on a year.
No, not a year.
September, so
Long enough though.
Right.
6 months.
This is the most haunted building in Frederick. by reputation, by its old. They used to sell that. One, you guys got any fun stories? And two, do you know of any of your own fun stories? A little knock there, a little door there, a little breeze that shouldn't be there type of, or have you heard of any of these? Because one of the first things I learned was this used to be an undertaker's building or right next door. And
you're gonna have
embalming.
You're gonna have to cut this out because I don't believe in ghosts.
That's fine. That's fine.
I don't either.
The reason
we don't have to. You don't have to cut it out. You don't have to cut it out.
You can be the party pooper, Dana.
I do not believe in ghosts. I don't, and so
I don't feel bad.
I don't know if I should tell the story or not.
Tell the story.
But your computer?
About my phone.
I also don't know how I feel about ghosts. Well, let me rephrase that. You might know more than I do how you feel. I'm pretty agnostic to it, but I'll tell you. I've never experienced any of the wild stuff that people talk about at my fort. However, I have experienced weird stuff at my fort. So I'm like open to the concept of it.
I have not experienced anything weird or unusual.
They're
here.
like, Dana.
No, I have not.
No. Do you know of any of the old stories? Because at one point in time, like every Halloween, there's usually...
we do have ghost tours.
But there's like a post made about like how
tours.
this is the most haunted building in Frederick.
I know.
There are a lot of stories.
Are you killing the party, Dana?
Yeah. I'm not a ghost guy.
That's cool, man.
I'm not a ghost guy.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know what I believe.
I love that. If you want me to clip that, I will. But if not, that's probably one of my favorite moments of this season already.
What's that?
They're just like, I'm killing the party.
No, you can do that. It's all if you believe it, you believe it. You know, I don't, and so people here, I'm like the only one. Well, Melissa, I don't think does either, but everyone else does. So they think they are sure we are wrong.
We do have haunted history tours.
Yeah,
well,
they're very popular.
Yeah.
And we do have stories.
Because here's why
other staff members
but
do tell
all
stories.
this haunting stuff started to become popular in the 90s.
Yeah,
like the 1990s or the
1990s.
1890s?
The 1990s. So where were the ghosts before 1990s?
They were being quiet, waiting for the grunge.
They were waiting for Robert Stack
They
to
were
start
waiting for grunge
the
music.
Unsolved Mystery Show.
Suddenly they started to have ghost
exactly.
tours at Gettysburg, and now everything's haunted, and there's ghosts everywhere.
Music got very angsty in the 90s, so the ghosts were like, finally, our time has arrived.
Right.
What
We're
was
being
it?
beckoned.
Right.
Was it you or was it someone else? Because I said, are we going to disturb anyone in here when we were sitting up? And you said, was it you or was it someone else?
No, it was someone else. It was someone else that was here. So the ghosts.
You say, only the ghosts.
Yes.
That's when I left.
That's why you left. Okay, because I couldn't, because I was turned away and I couldn't tell who said it, but I was like, ooh, ghosts. But I was gonna say the only thing the only ghost experience Civil War wise I've ever had was the drums of Frederick out there at Monocacy Battlefield.
It's true.
That was the only thing I ever heard, and I don't even know what I believe about it.
So are you not a fan then of A Christmas Carol? It's like basically the greatest ghost story ever told.
I love A Christmas Carol. I watch it religiously. The George C. Scott version is one of my Christmas
great
rituals.
version.
Yeah.
I think Michael Caine has the best version.
I like the Albert Finney one.
Well,
He's got Muppets in his.
Well, I watch them both every Christmas, but I prefer the Scott one. I really like.
I can't
that's a great
unsee
one.
him as Patton. I mean, like, no matter what, he's Patton for me.
I think he's such a good Scrooge.
He probably is.
Job.
I love that.
Yep.
I love the
One of my
redemption.
favorites.
I love all that.
But Michael Caine, guys,
Yeah, I know. He's good, too.
in the Muppets.
He's good, too.
The reason I asked that is just simply because I know that around our holiday season this year in October, we wanted to sort of have some fun with the spooky season. And I know that this is a building of haunted reputation. So I wanted to ask if you had your own stories. And two, maybe you put us in touch with somebody who wants to tell the spooky stories.
I can do that stuff.
And we'll make sure
Absolutely.
you're nowhere near the podcast that day.
Okay.
Has Dana left the building? Okay, record now.
Yeah.
You won't haunt that episode.
Yeah.
Guys, I've had a
They
blast.
do have some very cool stories.
Okay, I can't wait to hear them.
They do have cool stories. I can't remember any right now because usually I'm just like, yeah, whatever.
That's
and
all right.
Just like, eat my sandwich. But
You wish you had a sandwich right now. You're like, he
know.
brought up Ghost, that bastard.
No, it's
Pat, I thought you were cool, but now
wait,
I know.
is there anything else we have to say?
Yeah. Speak now, or God forbid, you guys can come back on our show whenever you want.
Become a member.
Yeah.
Check us out.
Absolutely. Membership
Civil War-
is easy.
CivilWarMed.org.
CivilWarMed.org.
It has a lot of benefits, including the magazine,
Right.
but you also get free admission. We
have
member benefit or member events twice a year.
You guys are on social media.
We have a
We
Facebook
are on
page.
social media,
we have
absolutely,
a
at
YouTube
Civil War
channel.
Med.
We have a YouTube channel. We have a lot of videos. That's where I want to populate with getting out more. But there's stuff on there now that's interesting. check that out. And come and visit us, 48 East Patrick Street down in beautiful downtown Frederick.
And definitely come down and see it now, and then again, so you can see the before and after of all this work we've talked about.
Right.
Absolutely.
I
Get
had
yourself a copy of Surgeon's Call.
Yeah,
Right
I
there.
wish
It's beautiful.
I
It's
want
fantastic.
you guys hopefully come back and we can
we'll come back.
Any-
take it
Anytime.
different directions.
We won't bring ghosts. We promise.
But you can't. Well, ghosts you can't bring. They float along.
I'm
Yeah.
Irish. I can bring ghosts wherever I want. That's all we do. Guys, I've had a blast having you back on the show.
Yeah.
I
Thank
didn't,
you so much
I didn't
for having
realize so much time had elapsed until this morning of recording, and that blew my mind, and I feel
am
terrible about it.
stunned. I'm stunned.
I'm stunned too.
So we will
2022.
2022. Like, that's how much life has happened.
Yeah.
But like literally it's been that long.
That's crazy.
But we'll have you
Wow.
back
Crazy.
sooner than that, because obviously I know that you guys are both fantastic storytellers. We still talk about the murder of Samuel Calvin Lamar quite regularly behind
Oh,
the
really?
scenes.
Yeah,
it's
that
just
was
one
a
of
great-
those like
It's a fantastic.
it's just one of those
story,
stories
yeah.
that just doesn't go away from your brain once you learn it. It's tragic.
Yeah.
It's happening. You don't, especially in our world of study of Civil War, like we zero in on these. So when you go to July 21st, 1861, everybody's eyes and brains are all focused on Manassas. But now that I know this, anytime I'm at Manassas, my brain has
I know.
100% of the time
Yeah.
been like, well, up in Adamstown, Maryland.
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, this terrible
across the
story.
river, not far to the north. This
Right.
terrible murder takes place.
So you guys are absolutely welcome to come back and share those kind of cool stories anytime. Rollins is a big fan of ours. I remembered
Yeah.
so much that I honestly was like, there's so much about this man.
Yeah.
I wonder how I'll remember it, but
well,
it's just there when I need it. So thank you,
really
Melissa.
like the way your podcast takes in all different areas of history. I think that's really cool.
That's why we picked the history things.
That's why they
There
pay us
was,
the big bucks.
The nice person at the front desk was asking about our show.
Yeah.
And they're like, were you Civil War only? And I was like, no. Can't live in that box.
No.
Even though our listeners want us to. So anyway, guys, check them out.
Yeah,
We still got to do Watergate too.
They got to remember, it's my show. I mean, I tell our listeners all the time, you got beef, start your own show, put in the work, and talk about what you want.
Well, then have us on. We'll
Otherwise,
fund
just
this
have
show.
fun listening, or if not, tune out. Move on with your lives.
Yeah.
So anyway, guys, civilwarmed.org. Follow them on all their social medias. Follow us on our social media at the History Things Podcast. That's Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. You want to talk some smack to the boys, Parker and Pat? You want to pay us a compliment? Whatever you feel in the middle, send us an email, historythingspodcast@gmail.com. For our guests today, Hall of Famers, Melissa Winn and Dana Shoaf. For our co-host, Parker Russell, I'm Pat McGuire. This has been another edition of the History Things Podcast, saying we will see you all later.
See ya.